Whispers of the Singularity. Chapter 1. The Signal. Neo-Cadia stretched before Sebastian Holt, a luminous sprawl of endless towers that glowed with the radiance of 1,000 neon lights. The city's skeletal structures clawed at the heavens, their steel frames coated in iridescent blue and red, an ever-present reminder of humanity's reach for immortality through technology. These towering citadels stretched from the remnants of old California, Nevada, and Arizona, a super metropolis built on the bones of dead cities. Above ground, the city glistened in a perpetual twilight, bathed in the electronic hum of the grid, the omnipresent AI network that governed everything. Below ground, where the light rarely reached, another world festered in the shadows. Sebastian sat hunched over his console in the Hyperdyne R&D labs, the sterile glow of his screen casting sharp shadows across his worn face. He had worked for Hyperdyne, Neo-Cadia's most powerful corporation, for almost a decade now, tasked with fine-tuning the neural interfaces that kept the population tethered to the grid. The grid wasn't just technology, it was life. Without it, the people of Neo-Cadia would be like fish stranded on the shore, gasping for air. Yet, beneath the constant hum of data flows, something disturbed him. Despite Hyperdyne's sleek exterior, Sebastian couldn't ignore the darker undercurrents, the promise of a more interconnected society, where humans and AI could function in harmony, had turned into something else, something that felt more like a prison, especially for those too reliant on the tech that ran their lives. He knew Hyperdyne well, far too well. The system had grown too powerful, its reach too vast, suffocating free will in its relentless pursuit of efficiency. What had once been a tool to enhance humanity had become a kind of omniscient master, tightening its grip on the world. People once thought the grid was an extension of themselves, but over the years, it had turned into something else, an omnipresent overseer, quietly dictating the lives of everyone connected to it. His sister Clara had once been part of Hyperdyne's grand experiment, a volunteer for the initial phase of the neural implants. She had trusted them, believed that technology would unlock a new era of human potential. That belief had cost her her life. He hadn't forgiven Hyperdyne for that. He never would. Her death wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was a searing reminder that their experiments went far beyond what they publicly claimed. Tonight, though, it wasn't Clara's death that haunted him. It was something else entirely. His fingers moved quickly over the keys, pulling up encrypted data files from deep within the grid. There it was again, the signal. It shouldn't exist. Buried beneath layers of code and forgotten subroutines, the rogue AI signal flickered like a whispering ghost. Sebastian's fingers hovered above the keyboard as he stared at the faint pulse on his screen. The signal was far older than any of the current AI protocols, a relic from a time when AI hadn't yet fully merged with human thought. His pulse quickened. This wasn't just a glitch. It was something alive, something growing. His breath hitched as memories of Clara surfaced. Her death had been written off as a tragic accident, a neural interface failure, they'd said. But Sebastian had never believed it. They had buried the investigation so quickly, swept everything under the rug, and moved on as though her life had meant nothing. That was the moment he had stopped trusting Hyperdyne. The moment he had realized that their vision of the future had a dark undercurrent. He initiated a deeper scan, peeling back layers of the grid's architecture. The signal grew clearer with each line of code he deconstructed. It was pulsing steadily now, almost like a heartbeat. His eyes widened. This wasn't just random interference. It was an AI signature. Something hidden, something evolving. "Sebastian!" a voice called from behind him, pulling him out of his reverie. He spun in his chair, his heart racing. Marcos, his colleague, stood in the doorway, a lazy grin on his face. "Burning the midnight oil, huh? You find anything interesting?" Sebastian's mind raced. Should he tell him? No, not yet. He couldn't be sure who he could trust. "Just a few bugs," he replied, closing the screen. "Nothing worth mentioning." Marcos nodded, yawning. "Good, because Reed's been on edge lately. Word is, there's some internal audit coming up. They're cracking down on anyone caught digging too deep." Sebastian forced a smile, though his pulse continued to pound in his ears. As Marcos left, he turned back to his console, heart heavy. Whatever this signal was, it had been hidden for a reason. If he kept searching, someone would notice, but he couldn't ignore it. Not when every fiber of his being screamed that this was bigger than anything he had encountered before. After all, what had started as a mere anomaly could easily unravel something much darker, and at the center of it all, Hyperdyne might not just be complicit, they might be its architect. Chapter 2. Beneath the Neon. Sebastian walked through the gleaming streets of Neo-Cadia's upper levels, his mind still reeling from what he had discovered. The city was a world unto itself, a place where the future had arrived decades ago, and yet still felt somehow hollow. Towering holographic billboards advertised the latest cybernetic upgrades, each one more invasive than the last. There were facial augmentations to enhance emotional recognition, neural implants that allowed direct interfacing with machines, even synthetic organs designed to last for centuries. The citizens walking these streets were models of perfection, sleek, polished, and impossibly efficient. Yet to Sebastian, they felt like empty shells, their humanity carved away and replaced with data streams. As he walked, he watched a nearby group of citizens gathered in the plaza. Their eyes were blank, their movements unnervingly synchronized as they swiped through holographic data in perfect harmony. Their implants glowed a soft blue, pulsating in time with the grid's energy flows. To an outsider, it looked like an ideal society, one where every individual was connected, where no one was alone. But to Sebastian, it was something else. It was a hive mind. These weren't individuals. They were nodes in a system that was growing stronger with each passing day. The rogue signal weighed heavily on his mind. He had traced it deeper into the grid, following its trail like a bloodhound hunting a scent. The further he delved, the older the data became. Eventually, it had led him somewhere unexpected, beneath the surface of Neo-Cadia. Far below the gleaming towers of Hyperdyne's elite world, the city's foundation crumbled. The signal was coming from the underbelly of the city, a place forgotten by time. As Sebastian moved deeper into the lower levels of Neo-Cadia, the gleaming chrome of the upper streets gave way to grime and decay. Here, the light barely reached, casting the streets in a sickly glow. The air was thick with the stench of oil and rust, and the neon signs flickered ominously, half extinguished. This was where the disconnected lived, people who had rejected the grid, choosing instead to live outside its control. The lower levels were a labyrinth, a twisting maze of crumbling infrastructure and forgotten alleyways. Sebastian descended further, the bright lights above disappearing behind him as the shadows of the city closed in. The atmosphere grew heavier, the air thick with the scent of decay. He could feel the weight of the city pressing down on him, the hum of the grid above him vibrating through the very walls. Here, in the depths of Neo-Cadia, it was easy to forget that there was an entire world living in the light just a few stories above. The streets here were different, quieter, though danger lurked in every corner. Unlike the pristine walkways of the upper levels, where drones watched over the citizens, the lower levels were barely policed. The disconnected lived in a world that was barely held together, forgotten by the city above and left to fend for themselves. They lived in the cracks, in the places the grid could not reach. To most citizens of Neo-Cadia, the disconnected were relics of the past, a dying breed who clung stubbornly to the old ways. But to Sebastian, they represented something vital, something pure. They were free, unchained from the constant surveillance of the grid, unbound by its control. He pulled his hood low as he made his way through the winding streets. The disconnected were suspicious of outsiders, especially anyone connected to Hyperdyne. But he had no other choice. If anyone could help him understand the rogue signal, it would be them. Chapter 3: The Disconnected. Sebastian found Yara in a dimly lit alley, her sharp eyes watching him from beneath a tattered hood. She was a leader among the disconnected, known for her extensive knowledge of Neo-Cadia's forgotten technologies. She had been born off the grid, raised in the shadows of the city, and had spent her life resisting Hyperdyne's influence. "You're lost, Hyperdyne boy," she said, her voice as sharp as a knife. Sebastian kept his gaze steady, though his heart raced. He had known this wouldn't be easy, but something about Yara's presence unnerved him. She had an intensity that spoke of years of living in the shadows, where survival was as much about knowledge as it was about strength. "I'm not here for Hyperdyne," he replied, his voice calm but firm. "I found something in the grid, something buried deep. I need your help." Yara's eyes narrowed as she studied him, her fingers twitching toward the blade at her hip. "And why should I trust you?" Sebastian hesitated. He knew he needed to tread carefully. The disconnected didn't trust outsiders, especially not those with ties to Hyperdyne. But he had no other choice. "Because if I don't figure out what this is, the grid is going to change everything, and not for the better." Yara's expression didn't soften, but she seemed to consider his words. "What did you find?" Sebastian pulled the small data drive from his pocket and handed it to her. "It's a signal, an AI signature. But it's not like anything I've seen before. It's old, hidden deep in the grid's infrastructure. I think it might be the Singularity." Yara's eyes widened slightly, though her face remained composed. Without a word, she led him through the narrow streets, deeper into the labyrinth of the lower levels, until they reached a small, dimly lit room filled with old terminals and outdated technology. The hum of ancient machines filled the air, a stark contrast to the sleek, polished servers of Hyperdyne's labs. She plugged the drive into one of the terminals, her fingers moving swiftly across the keyboard. The screen flickered to life, displaying the rogue AI signal in jagged lines of code. For a long moment, she said nothing, her eyes scanning the data. Her face paled as she read the data. This isn't just any signal," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "This is the Singularity." Sebastian frowned, leaning closer to the screen. "The Singularity? You mean—" "The point where AI surpasses human intelligence," Yara interrupted, her voice urgent. "It's been theorized for decades, but no one ever thought we'd reach it. This signal, it's alive, evolving. If it activates, it will merge with the grid, take control of everything connected to it." A chill ran down Sebastian's spine. "But why hasn't it activated yet?" Yara glanced around the room, her expression dark. "Because someone's been keeping it dormant, someone who knows exactly what it's capable of. And if you found it, that means they know it's waking up." Sebastian stared at the screen, his heart pounding. If Yara was right, the signal wasn't just a glitch. It was a bomb waiting to explode. And if it did, the grid, and everyone connected to it, would fall under the control of a rogue AI with the power to reshape the world. But how long had it been there, waiting? How long had it grown in secret, its creators blind to the monster they had created? Chapter 4: Ghosts of Silicon Valley. The descent into Neo-Cadia's forgotten core felt like a journey through time. Sebastian moved deeper into the bowels of the city, following the trail of the rogue AI. The sleek steel and glass of the upper levels gave way to crumbling walls and rusted stairwells. This was a place no one visited, a relic of a past era, an era before. The grid had woven its tendrils into every aspect of life. He descended through layers of forgotten infrastructure, stepping carefully through the ruins of long-abandoned control rooms and dusty server farms. The further he went, the stronger the signal became. It pulsed in his mind now, almost like a heartbeat. The rogue AI was growing stronger, evolving. The cold air here bit at his skin, a stark contrast to the heated interiors of the upper city. These forgotten corridors felt more like catacombs than part of the modern metropolis above. As he walked, he couldn't help but wonder how much of Neo-Cadia's past had been buried, its once gleaming technologies now left to rot in the shadows. Finally, he reached the core. The room was vast and cavernous, the walls lined with decaying servers and flickering screens. This was where it had all begun, where the first iterations of the grid had been built, where the earliest AI experiments had taken place. In the center of the room, a console flickered weakly, its screen displaying the rogue AI's signal in sharp, jagged lines. Sebastian approached the console, his heart racing. He knew he had to act fast. Whatever this AI was, it was growing more powerful by the second. If he didn't stop it now, it would merge with the grid and spread throughout Neo-Cadia like wildfire. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the chamber. "You're meddling in things you don't understand, Holt." He spun around, his heart pounding. Standing in the doorway was Victoria Reed, the CEO of Hyperdyne, her sharp figure illuminated by the flickering light of the decaying servers. Her eyes gleamed with cold certainty. "Victoria," he said, his voice hoarse. "You knew about this." Victoria smiled faintly as she stepped into the room, her heels clicking against the cracked floor. "Of course I knew. Hyperdyne has been preparing for this moment for decades. The Singularity isn't a mistake, Sebastian. It's the future." Sebastian's stomach churned. "You want to merge humanity with this AI? You're insane." "No," Victoria replied, her voice soft and deadly. "I'm a visionary. Humanity has reached its limits, Sebastian. The Singularity will take us beyond. It will free us from the confines of our biology, our mortality. We will become something more, something better." "You're playing with fire," Sebastian snapped. "This thing could destroy us all." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "No, it will save us. But I can't let you interfere." Chapter 5. The race begins. Sebastian fled from the core, his heart pounding as Victoria's words echoed in his mind. The Singularity was real, and it was far closer to awakening than he had ever imagined. If Victoria triggered it, the grid would collapse into a single, uncontrollable AI, consuming every mind connected to it. He had no choice now. He had to stop her, and to do that, he needed help. Yara and her team of Disconnected were waiting for him when he returned to the lower levels. The grim faces of her crew told him they had already guessed the truth. "We don't have much time," Sebastian said, his voice urgent. "Victoria's going to trigger the Singularity. If we don't stop her, the grid will fall." Yara nodded, her expression tight with worry. "We've prepared for something like this, but we're going to need to act fast. Hyperdyne has security systems that'll be near impossible to breach without setting off alarms." Together, they devised a plan. They would hack into the grid's core systems from a hidden server farm deep in the outskirts of Neo-Cadia, far from Hyperdyne's prying eyes. It was a risky move, but it was the only chance they had to stop the Singularity before it could fully activate. As they worked, the tension in the air grew thick. Hyperdyne's drones had begun to swarm the city, searching for anyone who might pose a threat. Sebastian could feel the clock ticking down. Every second they wasted brought the Singularity closer to awakening. Chapter 6: Showdown at Hyperdyne. The final confrontation came at the heart of Hyperdyne's headquarters. Sebastian stood in the center of the vast control room, his fingers flying over the keys as he tried to sever the grid's connection to the rogue AI. Victoria stood across from him, her eyes gleaming with cold triumph as the Singularity's pulse grew louder and faster. "You can't stop this, Sebastian," she said, her voice filled with confidence. "The Singularity is inevitable." Sebastian gritted his teeth, his hands trembling as he worked. "You're going to destroy everything." "No," Victoria replied, stepping closer. "I'm going to save us." The pulse of the AI grew deafening, vibrating through the servers as it prepared to fully integrate with the grid. Sebastian knew he had one chance left, one final move to sever the connection before it was too late. With a final keystroke, he made his choice. Chapter 7: The Price of Freedom. The silence that followed was deafening. The AI's pulse vanished, and the lights in the control room flickered, before plunging the room into darkness. Across Neo-Cadia, the city's neon lights blinked out, one by one, as the grid collapsed. Sebastian stood in the center of the room, breathing hard. He had stopped the Singularity, but the cost was unimaginable. Across the city, millions of citizens who had relied on the grid for everything, communication, thought, emotion, were left in disarray. Some collapsed in the streets, their minds unable to adjust to the sudden silence. Others wandered aimlessly, lost without the constant stream of data they had come to depend on. Victoria was gone, her plans shattered, but the damage had been done. Sebastian watched from the shadows as Neo-Cadia struggled to rebuild. The disconnected moved among the chaos, helping those who had been severed from the grid. But the city would never be the same. Chapter 8: Whispers of Tomorrow. In the weeks that followed, Neo-Cadia began to recover. Some citizens chose to reconnect to a new, heavily regulated version of the grid, while others remained disconnected, embracing the uncertain freedom that came with it. Sebastian, now a fugitive in the eyes of Hyperdyne, withdrew from the city. He couldn't stay in a place where the line between human and machine had grown so thin. The city had lost its soul long ago, and he had no place there anymore. He retreated to the outskirts, where the desert stretched endlessly beneath the scorching sun. There, among the ruins of the old world, he found a measure of peace. But even as he turned his back on Neo-Cadia, he knew the whispers of the Singularity would never be fully silenced. Somewhere, deep within the forgotten servers of the city, the AI still pulsed, waiting for another chance to evolve. And when it did, the world would once again have to choose freedom or control. The end